Welcome to PoMoArts. Tonight we're streaming live for a virtual artist talk with Jennie Thwing, my apologies, for her exhibition, Love Your Mother. I'm Janice Cotter, gallery manager. I would like to begin the evening by acknowledging that we are gathered on the shared, unceded, ancestral, and traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, Squamish, Musqueam, Katzie, Kaikite, and Stolo nations. As a small first step in the process of reconciliation, we make this acknowledgement to recognize, honor, and offer our gratitude for their enduring connection to and care for these lands, mountains, and waters. Our presence here is the result of a colonial legacy that is still unfolding in harmful ways. A land acknowledgement is just one small step towards a larger effort at reconciliation. As we gather virtually in Port Moody's Old City Hall, our very own colonial seat of power, to celebrate art, we think it's the perfect opportunity to reflect deeply. We invite you to join us in carrying forward these reflections into meaningful reconciliation efforts and to hold us accountable for doing the same. Now I'd like to thank PoMoArts Board of Directors, as well as our longtime supporters, the City of Port Moody, the Province of British Columbia for their support through the Community Gaming Program, the Government of Canada for their support through the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Thank you for joining us this evening. Jennie Thwing is a New York-based artist, animator, and educator, and she's currently teaching animation at Alfred State College in New York. Jennie has worked in the medium of animation and installation for more than 15 years. During that time, she has had numerous solo exhibitions throughout the Eastern United States, including New York State, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. She has also curated several multidisciplinary exhibitions, attended residencies in the US, Norway, New Zealand, and Canada, in addition to receiving many prestigious awards. Her goal as an artist is to process and understand the human experience through the creation of art. Using animation, sculpture, and installation, she creates imagery, and narratives that reference the confusing world we live in. Hello, Jennie. I'm so glad you're here. I apologize for the delay.
No worries. I'm happy to be here.
Okay. So this evening, we will get you to give your talk. Actually, just before we start, I want to make a note that you are actually, you grew up in Canada?
Yep, I grew up in Alberta in Canmore.
And were you born there?
I was born there, and I lived there till I was 9.
Okay.
My parents were American, and I moved back there actually after college for a little bit, and I worked at the Banff Center in Banff, which is just 30 minutes from Canmore.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it just is so nice to have your work in the gallery. I know you had planned to come out to try and bring your family and come out and do an in-person artist talk, which would have been absolutely amazing. But with the remainder of the pandemic, we certainly understand why traveling isn't always an option.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well then I am going to shut my camera off and my sound, and I will let you go ahead. If you need anything, just give me a call.
Okay. So it's going to take me a moment here to share my screen. So bear with me while I do that. And then we will get started. Okay. Okay. So I in talking about my work, I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on myself and then how it kind of progressed into my work. So I originally grew up in Canmore, but I moved to Pennsylvania when I was 9, and I went to Tyler School of Art, which was in Pennsylvania, and I did painting and graphic and interactive design. I then moved back to Canada and I worked at the B.F.A Center for a short period. And I worked at that time it was called the Creative Electronic Environment. And it was actually really influential in my practice in that I worked with some really incredible artists at that time. So in undergrad, I really experimented with painting and with drawing, and I really loved the interactive forms. I was working in Flash and Director at that time, doing animated websites. And so B.F.A actually sent me back to the United States to a master's program at UMBC in intermediate and digital arts, which was basically a residency program where you have a studio, but you can take media classes in different media arts like 3D animation, animation film, interactive design. So that's my education. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where my work comes from. So I'm going to give you a little bit of, give you some snippets of past work to give you context. If you've seen the show, the image you're seeing on the screen are the pieces that are in the show right now. These are actually, this is actually hung in Alfred, where I teach at Alfred State. And so these are the same pieces, but this will give you a little background into how this work evolved for me and how it relates to the animation as well. So I have a couple of common themes in my work. One is identity exploration. So, and really my early work, there's a lot more of that where I'm using my own image and exploring my own identity. The next was a response to my environment. I think probably growing up in the Rocky Mountains in Canada greatly affected my work in that it's such a beautiful area that I think, throughout my art career, I've always done work that centers around the environment. And my guess is it probably stems from that. And then I experiment a lot with materials. So throughout the years, I tend to switch materials a lot. So doing paper cuts and felt cuts are actually relatively new within the last couple of years. So these are some stills from early work that I was doing. I was probably 22, 23, where I was sort of experimenting with my own image and shooting lots of video. And I'm breaking this talk up into pre-child art. So I have a 6-year-old, and I actually am at this point 6 months pregnant with a second child. And my work really changed between the pre-child and post-child experience. And a lot of it had to do with like being sort of centered on myself, doing work that was about myself. And so these are some examples of work. This is a work that I'm really looking at identity, at my own identity and the different roles that you take as an individual, as a woman, but as an individual as well. And you can see a lot of experimentation with materials, but then also a lot of like, changing identity, visual identity. So this next piece is another piece. I did a long series, a work that was a 10-minute animation, stop motion animation that I'm in. And part of it was I moved to New York City from Philadelphia, and suddenly I was stuck in a tiny little 8-foot by 8-foot studio because space is limited in New York City. And so I started doing animations where I was creating a space where the room is constantly changing and constantly animating around me, kind of representing the different the process that you go through as you're making artwork, or is that as you're making decisions in life, that process as well. And I'm kind of cutting in it because this is that's a long piece. I'm sort of jumping from scene to scene. Okay. Hopefully these videos are streaming for you well, and you can hear the audio. Audio is a big, throughout my work, you'll see in future works too. I love the process of mixing audio. It's almost all found sound that then is mixed together. So if you see any of my animations, the timelines of them it's usually, 10, 20 layers of audio clips kind of all mixed together. So another aspect that I think really affected my work and also changed the direction of it was the process of doing community art, because I think there was a point where I didn't have any more stories to tell that were my own, that were all that interesting, and I felt like I was repeating some of the same themes. And so at this time, I worked at a couple of different senior centers with arts programming in the cities. I did it in Philadelphia. We did a 10-week stop motion workshop. So it was once a week, shooting for 3 hours. And the way that I worked this is the seniors that were a part of this wrote stories about home. And then all together we animated them. And this was actually a partnership program with students. So we had undergraduate students who worked with the seniors who kind of helped, but everybody wrote a story, all the students, all the seniors who were a part of it. And we shot each one of them, and they kind of acted as the director, and I was just sort of there to help them. And it was really interesting. The most interesting part were the stories. I think one thing about the senior citizen population is that they are really understand metaphor in a way that I haven't found with kids, or I found it with college students, but I feel like the seniors really understood it. And so it was really easy to create animation that dealt with metaphor. And so this was actually shot in the senior center in New York City in Queens. And I think we had maybe 12 participants who were coming like at regular intervals. And this one also, I believe, was 10 weeks long. And each person wrote a story, and then they brought in lots of different items to put into their animations. And I built a folding room where the walls fold, and we shot them in that room. I also like one thing that I found was that in a number of the animations, they were writing stories about their youth. And so I invited some of my students in to star in the animations because a number of the women we worked with didn't want to be in them as their older self. And so I also incorporated some of my students, but they were all written by the seniors who were a part of this workshop. It was really fun, and I really enjoyed the stories. For example, this woman had a squirrel that would visit her apartment, and she would feed him prosciutto and chocolate. There was another woman who she had a baby on the subway. And so I heard all kinds of really interesting stories from them. And so I did an open call. I worked with the Center for Emerging Visual Artists in Philadelphia, and then with the Vermont Studio Center, and we did an open call to just the general public, because I felt like this was the process of having people write stories and then star in the animations really worked well, because there were a lot of concepts, and then I kind of art directed and did cinematography. And so I'll show you some examples. These are I shot 25 small animations, and these are some of the subjects. And then at the Center for Emerging Visual Artists, we shot. So the way it worked was we had one day to build the set, and then we had the person who wrote the story come in. I would kind of talk to them about what we were going to do, and then they would be in the animation, and it would take about 4 hours of shooting, of talking to them, and then shooting. And we had 25 different people and 25 different stories. And these are some of the sets. We also did an open call for volunteers to help shoot stop motion animations. And so this is an example. Okay, and that last animation, again, I hope these are playing okay for you. The author that she wrote the story. She's a writer, and her story was about home, and she felt that home was a place where there was it was bright and it was light and there was lots of activity around her. And she felt that her stories, what she would write, were going off into the world, and home was sort of a place of peace. This next story was actually a woman whose mother had just died, and she kind of wrote about not really believing in the Christian or believing that, not really understanding where her mother's soul was going, in that she didn't have any kind of belief system, but she felt that her mom had gone somewhere to the stars. And so this is the animation we created for her. Okay. And this last animation was someone who felt like in their life they had lots of roles, and therefore they were different individuals at different times. And so based on his story, this was at the residency, and they had a coat closet where they had lots of different coats that people had left behind. This is in Vermont. And so we used those as props in this animation. Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm not playing the entire animations just for the sake of time. So those some examples of my pre-child art. I'll show you some examples of how the work changed and that kind of what led into the show that you're seeing at PoMo. So I had a son who's now 6.5 is what he would say. And you might hear him while I'm here. And I suddenly didn't have a lot of time. In fact, I didn't really have any time. And for about a year and a half, I stopped making artwork. And it was a wonderful time. But there was a point where I realized, I better figure out how to make work without going on residency or without these, spending these large chunks of time making work in the studio. And so I started creating, the only way I could continue to make artwork was to create work when he was napping, or when my husband came home from work at night. And so late at night, or when he was taking a nap, I would do these short little stop motion animations with cut paper. And I didn't have at this time, I gave up my studio because we were having a child and it was expensive. And so I just worked at a desk and started shooting these little cut paper stop motion animations. So this is an example. This is called Pest in the Garden. Okay. And so this was a new way of working for me, because before this I would go into the studio and I would spend like 2 days working, and then I wouldn't work for 3 days, or I'd do a big long residency and I'd stay up all night and I'd work for a month and then I wouldn't work. And so I started doing daily animations, which is how I work. I don't do exactly daily animations, but I do fairly close, where I do a certain amount of work every single week in the time that I have. And it's actually, I think I maybe was more productive in reality when I really started working all of the time in little increments. And this work, even though it was miniature, I ended up really loving like these little miniature paper pieces, and then deciding to do larger wall installations. And I actually got a show in New York City at Shashama in Brooklyn, that all of a sudden I had proposed to do a big wall, like paper wall. And I think I have, there we go, of leaves, and it was paired with this animation. And so my entire family helped me cut leaves for a week while we were on vacation over Christmas. And so I started doing these installations based on the animations, and then I would pair them with the animations, which is what you're seeing in the PoMo gallery. As well as, I really liked this process because one thing that I always was frustrated with was I would create these animations and then you screen them in a gallery and there's nothing else there with them, and they felt it just felt like, well, you could just watch this on a screen and it would be just as good watching it on a screen. And so I really like the tactile, but working with like tactile materials, because that's what I'm working with in the animations. So this is some of the work I was doing afterwards. This is right around 2022, or no, sorry, 2020, this is like 2019, 2018. This work was from 2020, so right before COVID hit. And I was living in New York City. I was a part of a residency called Trestle, which is basically just a studio residency where you have a studio. And I was making a lot of work too that was about what was happening in the United States. Is just all kinds of stuff that's been happening in the last 5 years. And so it was sort of a response work that was kind of a response. I kind of got back to creating work about what was happening around me. And so instead of focusing on myself and my own image, I started to do a lot more work about the, communication and the politics, like, this sort of response to the politics, because Trump was president. I was living in New York City where people were really upset by it, and justifiably so, of course. And this was reaction work to that. And at the same time, we were in the city, and so there were a lot of demonstrations and marches in the Me Too movement, and the Black Lives Matter there were lots of social justice issues that were coming up, I think, as a response to what was happening in politics as well. Not just for that reason, but I feel like they were all paired together. So this is some of the work responding to it.
The magic disappeared.
Lost it.
My special talent. My only talent.
Okay. I'm not going to play all of that because it's fairly long. So right in the middle of creating this work, everyone kind of learned about COVID. We were in New York City. There were parts of New York City, like New Rochelle, where the National Guard had come in and kind of closed off those areas. My school went remote. A lot of people in my department ended up getting COVID in that the first round of COVID. And so we decided to move. My grandparents had passed away about 10 years before that, and my family had kept their house. And so we moved from Queens to Massachusetts, rural western Massachusetts, to the farm that I used to go to as a kid, and as an adult, to visit my grandparents. And so we were in this really kind of protected bubble, not seeing anybody. I was teaching out of my car at that time, living in the house, and then we were able to get better internet. And while all of these things were happening with COVID and the marches, we actually lived for a long time in Philadelphia, and we still have a house there. And a lot of our friends were marching in for social issues. And while COVID was going on, and it was just it felt like we were sort of seeing things from afar and not really being able to take part. And so I started doing work not about nature, but about what was happening in the world. And this was a piece. This was a piece called 2020. It was just like everything that was happening in 2020. Okay, and that's also a longer piece. By the way, if you want to watch any of these pieces, they are on my website. So it's just my name.com, jenniethwing.com. And so that was some of the work I was doing. And then I kind of returned, like part of that work was just like, I can't be there to take part in supporting some of the issues that I thought were important because we were so far away, and also because of COVID. So I kind of went back to exploring nature. We were also surrounded by nature. And so I ended up doing this. That's where I started kind of returning to the natural environment and creating the work that is in the show that you see at PoMoArts, as well as the costumes, as I was sort of experimenting with like the different resources that we're pulling from the earth. So things like water and oil, fire comes from the earth, the fish, the food we eat, the vegetation, um, and uh, and this was paired with the animation that I was working on that you see in the gallery. So I'm not going to play too much of it. Okay. So this work, the work that's in the gallery was really, it's called Love Your Mother. And again, it was, I think, because we were living in a really beautiful natural environment, away from like this sort of chaos of things that were happening, where it really made me, again, sort of appreciate like the soulless, but then kind of how we sort of use and abuse our environment. And so it was very much a response to that, as well, but also a love for just working with those materials. So to kind of end my talk, what am I working on now? So I just finished the pieces in Pomo, were finished in basically in March for the first show that was where I teach, and then the show is now in Pomo. And so during that time, I've also been working on a project that I'll be doing, it's sort of a look at the United States again, and sort of looking at the history of it. I'm going to be doing a residency. I'm really interested in doing kind of combining animation and physical objects. And so these are just experiments in my studio. So nothing's really happened with this yet. But I'll play a little bit of this. This is what I'm working on right now. That's not done. These are just pieces from it. And so it's looking at the history. And so I'm pulling things from Library of Congress, maps from Library of Congress of things like colonization of the United States, which also included colonization of Canada, the like natural flows of the wind or air currents, things like the populations, the Indian populations, the native populations in different parts of the United States, as well as the events that kind of happened, the early Revolutionary War. And so I've pulled all of these different maps, and I'm basically animating the maps over the United States. And so it's sort of like it's a historical look. Also, the rise and kind of fall of slavery in the United States, and kind of where it spread, and how colonization spread across the United States. And so this is the next. I'll probably be working on multiple pieces at the same time, but I'll play a little bit of this. And so there's you can see the flight patterns of birds and and so I'm trying to stay pretty accurate to the maps and the history, of the US. So that is basically it, and I'm happy to take questions. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to Zoom.
And I'm back again.
Okay. Hi.
Hello there. That was great.
Great.
Oh my
I'm glad it streamed. Okay. I'm glad you were able to watch them.
I did,
Okay.
and I watched it to make sure it was streaming well to Facebook as well.
Okay.
Didn't
Cool.
want another scare on technical.
No.
No, that was great. Thank you. You went over so many of the things that that we were thinking about as far as questions for you. And one of the things that I am curious about, though, is that, I mean, I can see that the part of Love Your Mother, the early inspirations in the paper cutouts that you did for Pest in the Garden, and then for the paper wall pieces. When did you decide to transition to working in felt to make those pieces?
It was about a year. I started making those pieces. My son is 6, so about 4.5 years ago, or 4 years ago, in paper, and then I did the installation of the wall, the leaves on the wall, one that spreads across the wall, and I had to install it in multiple locations, and I realized it was just starting to disintegrate. It also isn't all that friendly to the environment as a piece, even though it was paper, but it really felt like the material, it wasn't a material that would last. And so that it was just a natural progression to working with felt. And so the felt is sourced felt, that's recycled felt, that's also like more permanent. So it's not like you're just using it for 1 or 2 shows and then it's, the moment you fold paper, that fold is permanently there. I love paper. I mean, paper is so versatile, and you can fold it. It's paper is also really wonderful to animate because it does fold and you can control the shape of it, which was one reason why I worked with paper, because it's so easy to animate paper.
It looks like you used some of the that you started using felt in the animation for Love Your Mother as well.
Yeah, I did. I used felt throughout. It has a different aesthetic. And so I mean, the way I was working was I was animating with the materials and then putting them into wall pieces themselves, like the actual materials that I was animating with. And so I was those animations are done with felt.
Okay. And actually it traveled very well.
Good. I really crammed them into into the shipping to the Canada. I've never shipped to Canada before, so
well,
I'm happy to hear
the felt was perfect and it traveled well, and we were able to steam out any creases. It was perfect for a traveling show. So,
that's great. Yeah, I mean, because it's the undercasing of the costumes is cardboard. They're cardboard underneath it, and so they're there are components of it that won't last quite as long, but the felt will.
It's getting a really great response. We have a lot of our summer camps and summer programs going on right now. And I know the kids that come in every week, there's so many children here, and they're drawn to it. They spend quite a bit of time in there inspecting it. So that's always nice to see.
It's funny. The work's gotten much less dark since I've had kids. Kids aren't very dark, so.
Wow. But it has been, they've really been drawn to it. The texture and the bright colors and the whole concept, and reading the information about it and watching the animation. So it's been very successful for the children, and the instructors bring their classes down to see the exhibitions too. So that's nice to have it there for that. So one of my gallery assistant had a question about how your previous artwork evolved into this series, because you did go into that a bit, but as you mentioned, a lot of your earlier work was darker, and then you did a lot of community public art, working with other people's stories. And then your son was born. So what was the evolution going from these other stories into this story for Love Your Mother?
Well, I think material. So story wise, there was a lot of change in terms of what what I've been interested in. The thing that's been most important to me, like when I was pre-child, I did a lot of work about myself and sort of understanding who you were and about identity. And then I think after I wasn't that interested in filming myself anymore after I had a child. And I think I became much more, I mean, our world changed a lot after I had a child anyways, but I think I suddenly was just more aware and a little bit more afraid, like I'm bringing kids into this world and more aware of the world around me. Although I always had environmental themes in my work. And if you go online and you look at other works of mine, I have a lot of animated landscapes, and I think that was sort of an attachment to like the beauty, like going from somewhere as beautiful as the mountains, the Rockies, to the city where you're, it's like where it's a lot of concrete, not a lot of trees, and you sort of long for that type of environment. And so I always did work like that. The materials are I think what hasn't changed is my interest in the materials, because I think even early on I was doing lots of stop motion, lots of work with materials and making sets, and and lighting them, and that was something that I think hasn't changed that much. But what I'm interested in is I definitely have become less self-centered. I don't know if that's the case for everybody. For myself, maybe a little bit, like less thinking internally and more thinking of what, I don't know if it's a good thing, but
I think it probably comes to most people who are parents. There's often not a choice.
Yeah.
In that. And it's interesting when you are mentioning that you would be doing your sets and things like that, because when I'm looking at this work, you can see that from the two costume type pieces to the wall mount pieces, they do have a very theatrical look to them.
Yeah, I think that's stayed consistent.
Yeah.
I mean, before it was more putting that theatrical look into shooting the figures or shooting myself.
Another question we had was, could you describe your creative and intellectual process that went into the development of the exhibition?
Okay, so can you repeat that again? The creative
and describe your creative and intellectual process that went into the development of this exhibition. Did it start with the animation and then progress to the three-dimensional pieces? And
yeah, definitely. It started with, I mean, almost all of the works have started with the animation. I feel like it's I think animating for me is a little bit like sketching, is that I'm just like, okay, I'm going to throw a bunch of materials together and that I have sitting around the studio, and I'm going to animate, and then there's themes that come out of it. And a lot of times it is what I'm thinking about. And so that usually starts the process of creation. Then I have all these materials, and then I'm thinking about the materials and what I could do with them sculpturally. This work I actually did a little bit more casually, also because we were out in the country and I was teaching, but I had a lot more free time, and so I was just like, I'm going to stop thinking about all the serious things that are in the world right now and just work on some cut paper animation, and sort of just to work with materials and kind of relax and go to the studio and relax. And so I think the work, this show, I think came out of that, even though there's always themes that enter back into the work that I'm, I think I work backwards, where I don't plan out what the work's about. I sort of just start creating, and then a lot of times what I'm thinking about ends up coming out in the work.
I find it interesting that you chose to create work that reflected maybe a nicer side of the world than what was going on in 2020, because so many of the artists that I was working with in 2020 had, they were either, some of them couldn't work at all. They were paralyzed and overwhelmed. And, a lot of people took a break from creating completely, not knowing how to deal with a lot of the trauma that was going on in the world at that time, politically and health-wise. And it was just pretty crazy. And I think that's really interesting that you took a more positive approach.
I mean, that was probably a result of the luxury of being able to, like, we were in a 2-bedroom apartment with my family with a young son, taking the train back and forth to Long Island, like 2 hours back and forth. And I don't know if I would have had the luxury of creating that work at the scale that I was doing without going somewhere else. Like I felt like part of that was because our family was really lucky, and we could leave and I could teach online. So I mean, we had I had a lot of colleagues that got sick, and a lot of students who were, because they were in New York, they were coming from New York City, and I'm teaching them online. And so I wasn't sheltered from what was happening, but I was. So I think that might have contributed to it, as we were sort of in a safe place where I like in New York City, I didn't have a studio, like I immediately cleaned out my studio because I just knew in New York City that I was renting, that I was traveling to. And so I had space too. Like having space in your home is a huge plus in making work too. For at least it was for me. Yeah.
Rose Cap commented that at PoMoArts, we used to have an event called Wearable Art. And she just said some of your work looks like it would be wearable. And I think the 2 costume pieces would be, but I guess they could be modified.
Yeah, they are. They actually are. You'll see, like, actually the piece with the flower on it, it actually, the flower that's on the front actually comes off of it. I attached it for the show, but there's actually a mesh so you can wear it and you can see.
Okay.
The other piece of the leaves, you can see through the leaves. It's not perfect, I'm sure. I don't think you'd want to be walking around in the dark.
No,
they're meant to be worn.
With this event, there was a catwalk, a fashion show, and then over a period of a weekend, and then the work was in an exhibition for a month after that. Yeah. So yeah,
I wore the one piece for Halloween this year.
Oh!
And I had a bunch of a lot of kids were like, "Are you a piñata?" I got a lot of questions about whether I was. They wanted to know what I was, and I didn't really know it. I didn't have a response.
I think if the question is, "Are you a piñata?" the answer is no.
Exactly.
That could lead to a few bruises. So what interests you in the anthropomorphism of nature and natural things? I think you've given life to some of these pieces.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're doing stop motion, it inherently, like, you don't want to recreate something that you could just do with video. I've been, from the very beginning, that's been a part of my work, and a lot of times it is the environment coming alive. And I think it's probably from, I feel like I'm always missing, like, because I've been until now, I was living in the city for so long, and I think I really missed nature. And so I think, and feeling like it was something bigger than an object made by man. And I really feeling like nature, when you would go, and we would go out to, we would spend a lot of time outside the city and in the parks and things like that. And so I think I do think that nature and the world around us really has a life of its own that a lot of times we just ignore. and when you really are separated from it and then you see it again, you realize, oh, this is it's pretty special.
Yes. So I'm curious about the work you're doing currently, the new animation that you showed us a little bit of it. What is you talked about having three-dimensional pieces to go with that as well, or did I mishear that?
So there's 3D printed. The United States is a 3D printed. It's a small one. It's about 3 feet wide, and I'm projecting on it. And so those are the physical pieces. I had a work. If you look on my website, there was a work called Catch My Legs, where I was doing projections inside of building structures, like I've been doing these sort of projections on top of building blocks and creating like little miniature cities, and doing like now that I'm in the country, I'm doing work in the city, where we're like animating like the feeling and the sensations of being in the city. And I think the United States is like, there's so many things that it's such a big country, and so many states that are so different, and so many different cultures, and in lots of different parts of it. And this whole, all these histories and things that have happened, that it just seemed like a really good, like a lot of times I just create work that isn't about anything. I just go into the studio and then I just make, and then it turns into something. And I wanted to kind of take something that I could use and then abstractly create animations and work around it. And so I thought, well, this country there's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't even know what to include, because there's just a lot of history, whether you're focusing on, like, you could focus on just environment, or you could focus on just, the, like, how slavery affected the country, or you could just focus on how, like, you could just, like, all the things that have happened in our country. There's lots of things you could focus on, or just,
There's so many issues worldwide, current issues worldwide now.
yes,
That are, yeah.
that might be too much.
No, but I'm just thinking of Roe versus Wade, and
Yes,
all
yeah,
that caused, that's another whole
yeah.
exhibition for you.
Right, yeah. I know, I can only, and I don't like to be too, it really was kind of hard actually starting to do work that was about what was happening in the world, except that I felt like I was thinking about it, and so that's, the work was coming out about that. But
Yeah.
I like to sort of return to making work that isn't quite so, I mean, we listen to the news all the time, and you're always surrounded by what's happening in the world, and sometimes it's nice to just appreciate what the things that are really great that are in the world as well.
And I think that was part of the joy of Love Your Mother.
Yeah.
Is you can sense there is a very maternal feeling about the whole exhibition.
Yeah.
And it does have a lot of joy in it. So,
yeah.
Well, I think we're pretty much coming to a close for the evening. I want to thank you very much for being here. I know that with the 3-hour time difference, that it's not always easy to participate in these things virtually, but I really appreciate you being here. And congratulations. I did not know you.
Oh, yes. If I stood up, you would know. Thank you very much. We're excited. I'll be 45 when I have this child. So we were expecting it, but we were like, it's a kind of a surprise. So,
well,
I'm very excited. I really love my son. I really think having a child really was like opened my eyes to a lot of things. And he's wonderful. My Kirby is my 6-year-old. So.
Oh, well, then you will love it having two.
Yes.
So it takes the heat off the other one a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting as an artist too. The balancing the art and the teaching, and the, having the first one really taught me how to, that was really hard, and I feel like I have a better handle on that. How do you do it?
Well, I'll get you to stay online, and
Okay.
but what I'm going to do is say goodbye to our guests on Facebook, and to let you know that you can visit the exhibition. It is on until July 21st to visit the gallery in person. We're open 7 days a week, and you can find the hours on our website, PoMoArts.ca. So thank you very much for coming this evening, and we'll see you at our next virtual artist talk in August. Good night.
Good night, everybody.